Ali Khamenei led Iran for many years as Rahbar, the country's supreme leader. At the time of his death, he was 86 years old. He was 7 years older than Donald Trump. The politician's full name was Ali Hosseini Khamenei. He was born on April 19, 1939, in the city of Mashhad in northeastern Iran. By origin, Khamenei was an Azerbaijani. He spoke Azerbaijani fluently. However, the family of the future Ayatollah chose a Persian identity. His mother was Iranian and raised her son specifically in the Persian tradition. Ali Khamenei was the second of 8 children. His father was a local Shiite cleric, so from childhood the boy was prepared for a religious career. He received his religious education from well-known sheikhs as well as from his own father. Over time, the young theologian became increasingly interested in politics and devoted more and more time to it, sometimes even more than to the study of sacred texts. There were many reasons for such an interest in politics. In those years, Iran was going through an extremely turbulent period. In the early 1950s, the left-leaning politician Mohammad Mossadegh came to power in the country. He attempted to implement radical reforms and nationalize the oil fields that were in British hands, but he was removed from power as a result of a coup organized by the CIA. The Americans feared the growing influence of the Soviet Union and overthrew the reformer, spending as much as $1 million on the special operation codenamed Ajax. Power was returned to Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, who set Iran on a course toward westernization. This could not please the local Shiite theologians, the Ayatollahs led by Ruhollah Khomeini. Together with his supporters, he began to develop a plan for a coup d'état and the establishment of a theocratic dictatorship. The Shah's security services, trained by the CIA and their Israeli counterparts, quickly uncovered the conspiracy and began repressing the rebels. In response, Khomeini called on Iranians to launch mass protests, but the Shah drowned this attempt in blood and expelled the Ayatollah from the country. However, the resistance was not crushed, because Khomeini's cause was continued by his followers, one of whom was Ali Khamenei. Khamenei was one of the leaders of the opposition to the Shah and played an important role during the Islamic Revolution, which, incidentally, unfolded largely according to the blueprint of the CIA planned coup of 1953. After the revolutionary's success, Khamenei took the post of Deputy Minister of Defense in the Provisional Revolutionary Government and later held several other important positions. In December 1979, the Council of Senior Shiite Theologians elected Ruhollah Khomeini as the Republic's supreme leader for life. Mass repressions had begun even earlier. In February, special tribunals started sentencing high-ranking military officers, former ministers, and governors to death. One of the first to be executed by firing squad in the new Iran was General Hassan Pakravan, who had been close to the Shah. The commander was not saved even by the fact that in 1964 it was he who had persuaded the authorities not to execute Khomeini. Students and professors were also subjected to mass executions. The revolutionaries closed educational institutions and dismissed disloyal teachers, journalists, and cultural workers. Some of them were executed. Western fashion, cinema, and works of literature were banned. Women were required to wear traditional Muslim clothing. Adultery, the consumption of alcohol, and the use of prohibited substances became criminal offenses. It is difficult to determine the exact number of victims of the revolutionary regime. However, one thing is clear: after the revolution, violence was used far more frequently and on a much larger scale than under the previous. According to the Armenian-Iranian historian Ervan Abrahamian, at least 9,000 Iranians were executed during the first 5 years of Khomeini's dictatorship. Abroad, agents of the Islamic Republic eliminated no fewer than 60 political émigrés. At the same time, the leaders of the Islamic Revolution insisted that they were merely building a new just society, one without violence or oppression. The culmination of the mass terror came in 1988. Over the course of several months, the Iranian authorities carried out mass executions of political prisoners across the country. According to various estimates, between 2,000 and 30,000 people were killed. Decisions on executions were made by special commissions that later became known as death commissions. During interrogations, prisoners were asked only a few questions, and the hearings themselves often lasted just a few minutes. One of the most common reasons for execution was a refusal to renounce one's political views or to declare loyalty to the Islamic regime. The brutality of the Islamists provoked a violent response. In the early 1980s, ultra-leftist groups waged an urban guerrilla campaign against the Islamic Republic. Bombings, shootouts, and mass executions became part of everyday life in Iran. On August 30, 1981, the newly elected president of Iran, Mohammad Ali Rajai, was killed in a terrorist attack in Tehran. Khamenei, who had himself survived an assassination attempt by terrorists just a few months earlier, became the leading candidate for the suddenly vacant position and was elected with 97% of the vote in the elections held in October of the same year. Thus, Khamenei became the first cleric to hold the office of president of the country. In 1985, he was re-elected for a second term. Khamenei's presidency fell during the period of the Islamic Republic's consolidation and the brutal war with Iraq. Saddam Hussein attacked Iran shortly after the revolution, when the Islamic Republic had already effectively dismantled the Shah's army and had not yet managed to create one of its own. His declared objective was the seizure of Khuzestan, a province rich in oil in southwestern Iran, where the majority of the population are Arabs. At the cost of extremely heavy losses, Iran repelled the invasion and went on the counteroffensive. Khomeini intended to advance all the way to Baghdad, overthrow Saddam, and establish in Iraq a country with a Shiite majority and Islamic Republic modeled on Iran. It is believed that in 1988 Khamenei, as president, approached the supreme leader and warned that this would lead to a confrontation with the United States, which Iran could not afford. Khomeini agreed to make peace. Ruhollah Khomeini died on June 3, 1989, at the age of 89. At that time, Ali Khamenei was not considered a likely successor. He lacked the formal theological qualifications required for the position. The Assembly of Experts, the body responsible for electing the supreme leader, was composed of several competing factions of clerics. After 2 months of debate, they concluded that they needed a compromise figure who would not claim the kind of personal, unlimited authority that Khomeini had exercised. Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani, who was then the Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, was the main advocate of this idea, and he also promoted his longtime protégé Khamenei for the role. In order to officially elect him as supreme leader, it was necessary to amend the constitution by removing the requirement that only someone holding the highest religious title could be considered for the position. Khamenei did not possess the authority or charisma of Khomeini, so the foundation of his power became personal connections and skillful bureaucratic maneuvering. Largely through his efforts, a kind of two-party system emerged in Iran and functioned successfully for 2 decades, a political swing between conservatives and reformists. In the same year, 1989, the conservative Rafsanjani became president. 8 years later he was succeeded by the reformist Mohammad Khatami, 8 years after that by the conservative Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, then by the reformist Hassan Rouhani, and later by the conservative Ebrahim Raisi. In this way, Khamenei balanced the interests of different elite groups and segments of society, alternately accommodating traditionalists and progressives, bazaar merchants and IT entrepreneurs. Khamenei, who assumed leadership of the country in 1989, became the record holder for length of time and power among modern world dictators, nearly 37 years. During his long rule, the influence of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps grew significantly, turning it into an elite branch of the country's security forces. This military political formation was created in 1979 on the basis of the paramilitary units of the Islamic Revolutionary Committees. Over time, the Corps came to control a significant portion of Iran's economy. It received state funding on a priority basis, and its personnel strength in different years ranged from 150,000 to 200,000 people. In addition to defending the country, the Corps is also responsible for ensuring internal security, which in practice often means the harsh suppression of mass protests. In July 1999, peaceful student protests began in the country, triggered by the closure of the opposition newspaper Salam. On the night of July 8, security forces stormed a student dormitory. As a result, at least one student was killed. These events sparked nationwide protests that lasted for several days. Units of the Basij brutally dispersed the demonstrators. At least 4 more people were killed, several students disappeared without a trace, and between 1,200 and 1,400 people were arrested. One of Khamenei's most important political decisions was the intensification of Iran's nuclear program in the early 2000s. The program had existed since the Shah's era and had secretly continued after the Islamic Revolution. In 2002, Iranian dissidents revealed information about a uranium enrichment facility in Natanz and a heavy water reactor in Iraq. Shortly afterward, the Iranian authorities announced that Khamenei had long ago issued a decree declaring the creation, storage, and use of nuclear weapons to be impermissible. At the same time, the Iranian government began actively insisting on Iran's right to a peaceful nuclear program. From the mid-2000s onward, increasing sanctions were imposed on Iran, and by the 2010s clear signs of a systemic crisis in the Iranian economy had become evident. Around the same time, the system of balancing between conservatives and reformists began to break down. In 2009, the conservative Mahmoud Ahmadinejad ran for a second presidential term, facing the reformist Mir Hossein Mousavi. Ahmadinejad was declared the winner of the election, but Mousavi and his supporters claimed that the vote had been massively rigged. Initially peaceful demonstrations turned into the largest protests since the Islamic Revolution of 1979. Security forces used widespread violence against the demonstrators. Many were killed or wounded, and thousands were arrested. In the 2010s, Iran gradually transformed from a kind of hybrid regime into a fairly typical autocracy, ruled by an elderly leader who relied on a vast security apparatus and was unwilling to make any compromises either in domestic or foreign policy. At the same time, the economic crisis caused by sanctions reached catastrophic proportions. Inflation of 30 to 40% per year over several consecutive years and the collapse of the national currency were accompanied by mass street protests and their brutal suppression. During the unrest of 2022 and 2023, which lasted for more than 6 months, human rights organizations recorded around 500 deaths and more than 20,000 arrests. The Iranian government did not deny that bloodshed had occurred. State television broadcast footage of improvised morgues and even acknowledged that some protesters had been killed. However, despite this, the protesters were labeled as terrorists, with claims that they were being funded by Western countries. The wave of discontent reached its peak at the end of December 2025, when hundreds of thousands of people took to the streets in all major cities of the country, demanding the overthrow of the regime. In essence, it was a genuine revolution, which the authorities suppressed with extreme brutality. According to available estimates, more than 30,000 people were killed, making these events one of the deadliest mass killings in recent history. For comparison, roughly the same number of people died during the siege of Aleppo in the Syrian civil war. However, that siege lasted 4 years and involved the use of heavy weaponry, including artillery and tanks. In the case of Iran, the time frame was roughly a single day, and only small arms were used. The killings in Iran can be compared only to the execution of nearly 34,000 people by the Nazis at Babi Yar in Kiev on September 29 to 30, 1941. This was one of the most horrific episodes of the Holocaust. In addition, tens of thousands of people in Iran were injured to varying degrees. More than 40,000 were arrested. These facts vividly illustrate the nature of the political regime that had developed in the country. Ali Khamenei was killed on the morning of February 28, 2026, during Operation Epic Fury as a result of an airstrike on his residence. The greatest tragedy of any new war remains the loss of ordinary lives. Nevertheless, Khamenei's death served as a warning to other authoritarian leaders who based their policies on force and military adventurism.